Planning Board. Remembered that again. First, if we could have a roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Board, trying to sound enthusiastic. And I am.
Who's playing Monday Night Football today?
Board Member Coronado.
Here.
Board Member Duzan.
Here.
Board Member Elrod. Board Member Graham.
Here.
Board Member Metcalf. Board Member Ranville.
Here.
Board Member Rudnicki.
Here.
Board Member Samuelson.
Here.
Great, you have a quorum.
We do just barely have a quorum.
Just barely.
And you may notice that there was one name omitted from the group, and unfortunately, Matt Bagnall offered to resign. He just doesn't feel that he has the time to commit and has missed the last 3 meetings. And so, unfortunately, we've lost Matt's help. So I just thought I'd bring that to your attention, and I think that elevates Mr. Rudnicki to a regular
new alternate number 1.
So next time you'll get the whole.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Rena's here. We better calm down.
She's here.
This must be the museum board.
Okay.
So just peachy. Okay. At least we're going to need a new liaison.
Yeah. Well, liaison for what?
HPV.
We don't have that anymore.
No more
We're eliminated
liaisons.
the liaison. So yeah.
Sorry, I guess my head's still in Maryland.
That was part of the boards and commissions reevaluation. When we became a board, they decided to do away with the liaisons in general.
That's correct, yes. That is correct.
Okay, so on the agenda this evening we have, and first I'd like to apologize for the distribution issue. I guess the file size was too big and some people didn't get it. I got it without the attachment. Some people got it with the attachment. Some people didn't get it at all. So.
I just got it today from.
I just got it today. Yeah.
Okay.
Did everybody just get it today?
No, I got it last week.
I got it last week without the attachments.
And you got it today?
This afternoon, yeah.
I got the message with the link Thursday. The links Thursday. No
Yeah,
doubt.
same here.
But no attachments, okay.
Right.
Yeah, we tried the attachments first. They didn't go to everybody, and so then we dropped those off and did the links, and even those didn't go, and we didn't realize that. We didn't get the notices back on that one for some reason.
I've
So,
also
I
discovered
apologize.
this evening in trying to copy the documents from the links, they won't copy all of them.
Oh,
Gold's
really?
did, but nobody else's would. So
Interesting.
Can you bring up Wheat Ridge? I couldn't even get theirs to come up.
I don't remember now. I brought up Wheat Ridge. I could get to the page, to the link. I could get to the link for all of them. But when I tried saving the documents, it was the Denver Cherry Creek and the Wheat Ridge documents that wouldn't save.
Really?
Thornton's, I could, but you have to save it section by section, and for
Oh, right.
200 and some pages,
Yeah,
that just
forget
didn't
that.
seem worthwhile.
Yeah.
Golden's would save, but that was it. So you kind of have to look at them online.
Yeah.
Well, since everybody hasn't had a chance to review them, obviously this may be a multi-study session discussion, but I thought it was important. We didn't have any other cases or anything, but because the public process is just finished and we had a good sort of closing meeting, I think with some good additional input and a good presentation from Dennis on what we've heard. And now we're in the process of transitioning from, what we've heard to what's the plan. I thought it was, talking to Glenn, that it would be a good idea to try to figure out what level this plan is at. Is it a 40,000 foot? Is it a treetop? What are some other comparative plans that we've talked about in the past, and how do they apply to Littleton? Because it might be a multi-session discussion, we might even not use the full 2 hours tonight, maybe get to watch some of the football game. So we'll see how it goes. Dennis, I'm not sure how much you have to present, but anyway, that's my intro. Do you want to
Good. Yeah, I did, knowing that we had the screw up, and I really apologize for that. We did bring copies of other plans that if you would like to borrow and take home, please do, from other communities. Just look at and see what the options are out there. There's some, I think, some very good plans and some kind of weak plans as well, of course. But there certainly is a huge variety of ways to approach it. There seems to be a trend in some of the newer plans in terms of how they're approaching things, and I think we're kind of on board for that. In terms of looking at these principles in terms of what are you really trying to achieve, so you get some overlap between the vision statement and the principle and where you go with the policies and the goals at that point. I've got some handouts, of course. I also have, I just want to pass these around, if you didn't get to pick them up, this is the Frisco Community Plan that we were referencing, and then the City of Fort Collins Community Plan, and you can kind of just see between the difference in options. And they're very similar in some ways in terms of kind of how they're approaching it, in terms of the way they're writing it, and kind of the way they're both doing principles and going that way. But this one gets into unbelievable detail. And that certainly is an option for different communities if you want to get into that. Our thought, Glenn and I talking, and what we've been trying to approach is something much simpler. What we've seen work is really just keeping it at that 30,000-foot level, where you have a lot more flexibility if you kind of keep it simple, make sure you're covering all the bases with the comp plan itself, with the initial document. That means that you can then get into all the additional planning, strategic plans and area plans, corridor plans, whatever you need to give you the level of detail that you need. But for the primary document itself, keeping it fairly simple, and it seems to be a good way to go from what we've seen over the years. I'll pass both of these around, and you can kind of compare them and see. Okay, we'll start there. What I've handed out is a three-parter, and I did go through, and I also have, I kind of looked at the information that Karina passed out to us, which was looking at a way of organizing these, where systems she handed out had priorities, objectives, and strategies, tactics, and metrics. And I think it's a great way to look at all this. I've incorporated some of that with a little different language, perhaps, but I think the same kind of strategy in terms of getting more and more detailed and looking at what is your implementation and then how do you measure that as you get into it. So I think we're on the same board for that. The first couple of pages here, I took just a shot at, with what you've seen in the past couple of meetings with looking at the principles that we looked at. So, okay, if we were to go on a fairly simple basis and we were to kind of look at the system that Karina brought in, what might that look like in terms of just a table of contents? Because I think if you look at the table of contents online sometimes for the plans, it's a really good way to initially tell what's in that plan, how detailed is it, how are they approaching this. In this case, I think you always end up with a little bit of background in terms of planning process and planning context and how to use this plan. It can be short or lengthy. And then other places I've seen have done a fairly good job of saying, here's what we've accomplished since the last plan was adopted. And kind of a summary of here's what was done since the 81 plan was done. And then kind of summarizing kind of what the issues are. And they break those down into challenges and opportunities. So what have we been hearing in terms of what are the challenges that are facing the city? What are we hearing in terms of opportunities that we have? Because in my mind, you need to have a pretty organized thinking pattern of what's the issue and then what's the goal and then what's the policy, so that because we often have a tendency to jump to what's our goal without thinking, well, that's your goal, but what's the issue you're trying to address with that goal? And so the issues are just a good way of kind of starting off and saying, those challenges and opportunities, what are we trying to address? So then you can go back and actually see if you've actually accomplished it. I think without identifying what your opportunity is or what your challenge is, it's really hard to evaluate whether you've actually accomplished what you were setting out to do. The next thing we've talked about before is just kind of combining all this into a vision statement. And the vision statement, in my mind, is probably the most important thing in the plan. because it is what you go back to for interpretation. It's what you go back to if there are changes that you didn't anticipate. If there's something in there that you need some direction on, hopefully you've got enough in that vision statement. It doesn't mean it has to be lengthy, but you have to have the essence of all those ideas you're trying to get across of what we want Littleton to be. So that vision statement, one page, short, can be bullets. Different communities do it different ways, and take a look at those, if you would, in terms of what you think are effective. But I think that's a really key tool. And then transformative projects is something we're seeing other communities do as well, and you might look at those. And those are the things that they're pulling out and saying, okay, what are the ones that actually, it's kind of getting towards strategic plan in terms of what are the things that would really get us started? What are the things that get us down the road in terms of accomplishing our vision? If you can go through and say, here's who we want to be, what are the 5 things that we think are really kind of starters for that? What would really get us jump-started on that road or get us pretty far down that road? And that's a fun thing to do. And I think it kind of helps pull that out as well in terms of what we're doing.
Pull one out of a hat, please, but explain a Littleton transformative project.
Good.
In your mind.
Okay. In my mind, if I think about what we want Littleton to be in 20 years, 30 years, and I think what's going to happen on Broadway, for example, I would think that we would start seeing some redevelopment of Broadway, some residential and some retail, a little bit more activity along there that's going to help activate those neighborhoods around it, and also just get more use out of Broadway. I think that might be one. Or there might be one of working on Santa Fe, a key project on Santa Fe. Something downtown that we think hasn't been done. I'm not sure there is one downtown at this point. But I think there are some projects around that would get us there. Right? It may be just really focusing in on the shopping centers and the ones that we've seen not performing, wherever they might be, if they're on Bellevue or Broadway or someplace else. But I think it's that type of thing. I think of all the things that we could do, small or large, let's pick out some of the ones that we think might really make a difference in terms of getting us where we want to be. So, other questions about that?
So it's kind of a to-do list? Is that what you're thinking?
It's a transformative project is kind of a quick description. It kind of comes out of a to-do list, but it's more a description without the to-do, without the time frame to it. It just kind of identifies, here are the 4 or 5 things that we think would really jumpstart. And it may be repeated somewhere else as well, but these are probably our top 5 choices. And to pull those out sometimes and kind of stick them up in front of the plan seems to be a fairly effective way to communicate that rather than having it buried in somewhere else, just to have a higher priority.
I kind of thought of that as when you say something like transformative, it insinuates it's a significant step change in how we're doing something now. So it's to me it sounds like it's more than a to-do list. It really is a
Redirection
sorts.
Or at least things with
Community changing. Significant changes. Things in the past would be getting rid of the concrete toadstools downtown.
Right.
Getting the overpass so that we're not bollocksing up traffic every day for the trains going through town.
Getting mineral to go through.
Getting mineral to go through, cutting ridge off so that the residential core is isolated.
Convincing the core that the river should not be a concrete channel.
So when we got the light rail, that was
Absolutely.
transformative.
Transformative. What really had a significant, palpable change on the community. And all of those did.
Yeah, sure did.
I like that idea.
Do you? Okay, good.
It just gives people an alert of let's keep these in our forefront of our mind of what we're going to be doing.
Right, exactly. I think so too.
The word projects just bothers me a little bit in that it to me feels like it's a site, a particular site, whereas it could be a effort, initiative, something a little bit broader than somebody redoing a car dealer or something.
It was a transformative concept or transformative idea or something else.
I know the city of Centennial, when they developed their comprehensive plan, they identified, they had big asterisks. They had one right over South Glen. And so that was one of their transformative, I forgot what they called it. It wasn't a project, but it was a redevelopment or something.
Didn't take long.
So,
Yeah, it's something that just seems like, let's put our effort into that. So, yeah, it's just a real key thing.
See the Frisco again.
And then, basically what we do is goals, policies, strategies, and metrics. And I don't know that we need to do all of those at this point, maybe goals, policies, and strategies. Metrics is kind of a... The danger with metrics, in my mind, is that you can spend too much time measuring and gauging, and you just don't want to set too complex a system. I think it's good to have those as well, that you've got those measuring points and know when you've reached some kind of level of success. But I don't think you want to spend a ton of time setting up systems and recording everything and doing analysis and stuff. It can overwhelm everything else you're trying to achieve.
Give me an example of metrics.
A metric?
I'm not
Okay.
sure what you mean by.
Okay. Well,
I see the other three are obvious.
That's an excellent question. I always have a problem with that word myself.
And if I don't understand it, or half of us don't understand it, does that
we
word
should-
belong there?
No, I think not. So-
Also,
Measurements, maybe, or
and
something.
another word for projects. Have a more lofty word there. Anyway,
I think it's probably measurements, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think measurement might be another word, but it could be something like if our goal statement would be to create broader housing options for a diverse community, a metric might be 50% of our housing is now for low-income families, 20%. So if we would want to get as sophisticated as that, I think that's difficult to do for a long-term comprehensive plan. Those are more of your kind of your year-to-year planning. So I think it's a little bit broader, and maybe it even gets captured in the goals that it's, overall increase diversity of housing. But I think it's important to have some kind of measurement or guideline, like what does increase mean? Is it 1%? Is it 10%? Because that would significantly change the direction of the plan.
Targets is the word that's ringing in my head, but I don't want to be as specific as a target.
Milestones, maybe?
Milestone marks, something to identify progress I'm totally in favor of, but I'm with you that if you overanalyze it and the world changes on you, what value is that?
Resort to metrics when you really need it to make the case, and you can really back it up. It isn't isolated, playing with the numbers. It has some meaning. But if we use it too often and fill the document with tables and charts and everything else, the example that I'm going to bring up is what we got from that seminar up in Golden. You use the metrics that the fraction of the population that's going to be over 75 is going to go up for the next 10 years. But don't project it past that, so you're not getting an overall picture. Selective metrics, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
So be very careful about metrics. It's the sorcerer's apprentice kind of thing. It could eat you alive.
That's a good point.
Dr. Cogg's, what do they call that plan, the urban center?
Yep, the urban centers.
Urban centers, they have metrics that they use
They
that are
love
related to
metrics.
sustainability. 50% of new jobs will be within this area, or, same as you were mentioning. I think if you don't have metrics, you don't know which direction you're headed, but at the same time, who measures it?
Right.
And when you get there, what do you do?
It's
Or if you get there.
it's like any other metrics or chart.
Yeah.
If you start off by saying, here's where we were yesterday, here's where we are today, that's where we're going. Well, for today, that's where we're going. Tomorrow, we could go down this way, we could go up. You have to be very careful.
And I think that, what gets measured gets done, so it's well-intentioned in its word. But at the same time, if we over-define, we kill the artistic process of all that this does, and the dream dies, and it becomes a very data-driven project. And there's a place for both. But at this point, I think we have the liberty of dreaming, so we should stay there until we get that further defined. Then hold ourselves to task of, now what really do we mean by that?
I think to remember this discussion when we talk about the level of detail of the plan, because the two sort of bookends that we looked at were the Frisco plan and the Fort Collins plan, and the level of detail there is incredibly different. So I think
pages to 300?
Yeah.
They are
So I
the
think
same
that-
color, though.
But yeah,
Probably use the same picture, a small town in Montana or something.
I know that the Fort
Community
Collins
diversity.
plan has metrics in it, and I know that Frisco doesn't.
3 pages at the end, about it.
But, okay.
How would, can you explain policies versus strategies?
Sure. In my mind, a goal is almost reversal of an issue. A goal is, here's what we're trying to achieve. Then a policy is kind of a general statement in terms of what we want to do, how we want to get there. So it begins to get into action a little bit. And strategy, I think, actually gets into more detail. And again, that's debatable with me, too, in terms of we actually get that far, or do we just stick at goals and policies for this, at this level? Because there's always the objective discussion, too, and it's defined differently in every plan you look at. But in my mind, goals and policies are the most critical thing of the two, the vision and goals and policies. Strategies at some point, but depending on the level we're at, may not need to do too much of that. The policy itself may give us the direction we need. The strategy gets into specific actions.
Karina, we struggled with that for 4 years. The idea is, okay, here's the vision, how do you get there? And then we started chopping and dicing and doing the tiered level of goals and policies and strategies and whatever, tasks. And at some point you get tangled up in your own thinking because you're trying to put too many levels on it. So basically it's what do you want to do and how do you want to get there? No, really, that's
It really is. It really
That's
is.
why I was asking for that
Yeah,
clarification.
keep it as simple as possible.
What would a sentence sound like as a policy versus a
Well, can I give
strategy?
you, this may not be right, but I'm going to throw out an idea. A goal. Green streets or more landscaped beautification on streets. Policy, streets will have trees every 30 feet or a certain type of tree and a percentage of shrub cover and lawn cover. Strategy, we will set the budget to acquire so many trees and plant them next fall. Metric, we actually planted 20 trees.
That's good.
The strategies are likely going to be multiple. I mean, we're going to be looking, in that particular example, we'll be looking at what can or should the city be doing and what can it afford to do with what's out there now, and how can the city encourage, promote, induce others to do the same thing along the private face of the streets. So, yeah, that's, but again, if we slice and dice it
So
too
that
fine,
sounded,
may be too
that
much.
sounded like the policy was the what, and the strategies was the how.
well, that's why we have to be careful. When we start trying to do this and then this and then this, and it gets too complicated.
Yeah.
Well, and particularly for the comp plan, I think we may just want to stick to those upper levels and think about the strategies and the metrics may come later when we do strategic plans, implementation plans, or small area plans where we actually get that level of detail.
What we found in trying to do this, and it was a struggle for those of you who weren't here, is when we found that the different levels, the phrasing or the sentence in the subsequent levels replicated the phrasing in the one above that, it's repetitious, it's redundant, you don't need it, you're getting tangled up. And there's still a lot of that in there.
What did we end up, I guess, with the structure there? Did we have goals,
Vision,
objectives?
goals, policies.
Strategy. I think we had
Was it
strategies.
strategies, or did we do
Yeah. We actually got into
Just
metrics at one point.
Well, yeah, it was too convoluted. We overthought it.
Yeah.
That's basically what happened. And overworked it. You can overwork metal and pretty soon it fatigues and you don't have anything left. No, really. And we did that. Goals, policies, and implementation strategies.
I think what Dennis was starting to touch on, I think is important to remember as we talk about the level of detail, is that there are all these underlying plans that then, something like this could come after, or Santa Fe CART, or maybe a Parks Master Plan, or, all these levels of detail that should follow the vision plan, so we keep it brief and concise.
I don't think the policy was really in the vision and the goal, between the vision and the goals, or with the actions that we proposed to take. It was the stuff we tried to infill and call it policies and strategies. And then you started saying, we were losing our way on what were we doing? Are we identifying a goal and elaborating on it? or are we trying to set the stage for the actions that we're going to take and trying to make the case for it? We just kind of got lost in the middle.
Is it typical to write the meat, which I would call dynamic, livable outdoor, which we'll get to that here in a second, before you write the preamble? Or is it typical to write the preamble and then write the meat?
Yeah, it goes back and forth. I think it's typically, I think probably people write the meat before they write the preamble. Yeah.
Because it seems that once it is a chicken and the egg conversation, but it seems that if we could truly lay out, which you've done through the Inspire Littleton process and other venues that we've used, that might help to clarify what is the goal, what is the policy, which sounds to me like a lot like rules and regulations. What is the strategy?
Okay. Then maybe we need to define preamble, I guess.
Umbrellas over all
the same
of this.
thing. Okay, so
I think it's important to lay out the vision first, and that is the hardest part. And even though it's one page or one paragraph, it's the hardest paragraph you will ever write. And so that really has to set the tone, and that becomes our borders that we have to work with and keep checking in on. Otherwise, if you start with the meat, then your vision gets so big and you're trying to put everything into it. So I think it has to start with vision. Doesn't mean it doesn't get refined, but that has to be kind of our guiding principle.
We've gone through a loop in the last 5 to almost 6 years. The original 81 comp plan was a bottom-up. Individual neighborhoods developed their vision and their major criteria or priorities. The city staff tried to pull that into a community-wide development or a document looking at common elements and develop a vision from that. When the city council directed the planning commission to re-examine that, we got Littleton 2030, which was more of a, okay, let's back up, take the vision, do it top-down, do the whole thing. City council shifted, so we did the loop back to, oh no, let's go back to the way it was before, neighborhood-driven, bottom-up, and then somewhere in that process, we went right back to, no, we need to start with the vision and work our way down. So that's the last 5-year loop. 6 years, almost?
7.
7? So that's been where we've gone, and this kind of it started off with the bottom-up, neighborhood-focused, detail-driven, and then halfway through, we shifted to vision and how we find what the community wants for it. And I think, sounds like that's where we are now, and that's certainly what most of these plans are. This was nobody else was here when this was done. Look around the room. This was a homegrown, very earnest effort by a bunch of community members. It was not staff-driven. It was not city council-driven. They guided the process, but this was homespun.
Neighborhood meetings, each neighborhood plan.
Right.
They read all the same.
And it was valuable at the time for the kind of community Littleton was, with a lot of people involved instead of a core group driving it, and a supportive staff ready to help guide them through it. But it's not where we are today. I mean, that's too many years ago.
I think we're at a point where we could do that vision, though, because I don't think we could do the vision. I know we've attempted to do the vision in some situations where we haven't done any of the outreach, we haven't done the kind of, even the setting of the principles. But I think the principles help us at least to get to that point, and then we go back and do the vision. And then we actually fill in a lot more detail. But you're right, you need that kind of border. But I think it is a chicken and egg, definitely. So you go out a little bit, then you come back and figure out what the vision statement.
The way I interpreted Andrew's question in terms of writing the preamble first or the goals and objectives was not the vision, because I totally agree the vision needs to come first, and I think we do have enough information. I think it's more of the sort of executive summary introduction, and I may be mistaken, but that's the way I understood it. Some of the other parts of it, I think the vision is a critical first step.
That's what I was saying, too, when I answered that. Yeah, exactly. Was it? Yeah, so
I find when I write that I get the meat out and really kind of get my thoughts in order, and then the front end introduction preamble is what I meant by introduction.
Right.
Not necessarily vision. I am in agreement with that. It just flows because I already wrote all that, and now I'm taking what I wrote in 2 pages and I'm turning it into 1 sentence.
Right.
To drive that forward.
So what you're saying is we don't have to write it in
I'm saying
in order, from top to the bottom.
the introduction is written last.
Yeah.
The accomplishment and challenges is a nice to know, and frankly, it already exists somewhere around there. Vision, yes, absolutely. Let's get an idea up there. But transformative projects spit out of the goals, policies, and procedures, whatever that says. And then in the end is some version. But to David's point earlier about the neighborhood feeding up the bottom-up idea, it was actually something I was quite attracted to. I'm not sure which one it was. It was the one with the circles in it. That I do think there is a place for various neighborhoods, because that got my mind spinning of my area versus, the Mineral Broadway area, which is night and day from where I live. I'd be very curious to see what the pockets would look like, if that would change any overarching purpose, which is what you have listed here as 1 through 7.
We're going to get into that when we start talking about strategies or actions to take. I mean, the thing that keeps coming up is what do you do about underperforming retail? What do you do about transitional neighborhoods? When we start proposing broad citywide policies or approaches to that, you're going to find very different attitudes from one neighborhood to another. The example I used from this one was the neighborhood over around Goddard and Centennial liked the idea of having commercial integrated with what's going on in the neighborhood. An area like Aberdeen Village is going to say, don't you even talk about it. So, well, yeah, that was the other gesture I had in mind. No, when we start talking about specific policy changes and zoning or procedure changes, we're going to have to allow for variations like that and say, instead of saying one size fits all.
And I think I think that's exactly the intent. And coming back to the vision is the vision for the city. It doesn't mean it has to be implemented in every sub-community within the city. But overall, when you bring it all together, the individual components should still deliver on that overall vision.
But knowing nothing of what I'm saying, it's New York and the 5 boroughs, or 7 boroughs, whatever it is. That Brooklyn is uniquely different than Queens, is uniquely different than Manhattan, and each should be treated separately. We're not nearly that diverse, but yet I think that point still...
Do we have a neighborhood map? Does the city have a neighborhood map?
We do have a neighborhood map in the...
You want the 7 neighborhoods that were in here, some of which are 3 miles long and 1.5 miles deep?
Okay.
Or do you want the little neighborhoods?
Yeah.
I think we're going to need a chapter towards the end saying, once this new comp plan is written, how is it amended? How do we start doing individual community plans that Andrew's talking about? Aberdeen Village different from South Park, what have you. How do we encourage the neighborhoods to get their butts in a chair and start thinking about it and writing their own little neighborhood plan?
And the part of that that's going to bite us first isn't Aberdeen Village up here and South Park down here. It's going to be 2 neighborhoods side by side around Broadway, and we start adopting overall vision or policy for evolving Broadway, and one neighborhood says, we love that, do it, and the neighborhood right next to it, almost literally right next door, says, not in a million years.
I think, for the most part, when I think about the neighborhoods, I don't see a lot of differences between them. And I think, like Mark said, there's a tremendous amount of overlap even in the 81 plan with the different neighborhood sections.
Well, just to front end, you read these, and every neighborhood plan is about the same.
So,
no through traffic, safe streets.
Enforce the zoning code.
I don't know that it's changed that much. I mean, I think you think about what are the real issues the neighbors are facing, they tend to be common, between all the other neighborhoods, with all the neighborhoods. And it's probably more on what we've talked about before, on the edges, they're on the corridors. It's how they back onto things. It's what they're close to. It's not internal to most of our neighborhoods because we're in a fortunate position where most of our land uses in the city, the residential particularly, are consistent with the zoning. So we've kind of stabilized those neighborhoods and said, here's what we're putting in place.
Bear in mind, this was in existence, or this prevailed for a period when there wasn't a lot of change going on. Everything we were talking about in the website, everything we've been talking about in the community outreach meetings, everything that City Council and Michael Penny have been talking about is saying, okay, we need to reappraise. It's a dynamic situation. What are we going to do to respond to that, to keep the vision of the city we want, but make it move? And then you're going to find more conflicts between the placidity and stability of this kind of document and what we're going to be talking about in goals and policies, in converting retail strip centers right against neighborhoods, and converting areas like Broadway or Bellevue or the areas south on Santa Fe.
But if we keep it at a big picture type of plan, like a 30,000-foot view, we should be general enough to where it's not going to necessarily threaten the neighborhood on specific things that could happen. The goals, and now I'm looking at the wall over there, and it says goals and objectives for the city council or for the city in general. 2 simple items that replace 4 items here. I like the Frisco plan because of its simplicity. I think it was the Golden plan, had areas of higher potential change, areas of low potential change.
It wasn't much bigger than what we did for downtown.
And so it identified zones and or areas that are fairly amoeba-like, that could be, to where you can't necessarily say it's going to happen right there, but it's going to happen in this area possibly.
But just remember, just as our current zoning and planning situation is not completely Euclidean based on land use, it is a lot of form-based stuff. That's what the whole design standards and guidelines and HPV standards are all about. What we've been talking about for the last year and a half in particular, since we started getting serious about this, is the same sort of thing. It isn't just 30,000 feet. It can't be if we're talking about policies, strategies, and actions. My reference is always you. It's great to say you're in charge of managing the forest, not the individual trees, but if you don't understand how the trees grow individually and together, you can't manage the forest.
Right.
So we're going to have to keep that in mind when we're doing the overview.
Well, one thing, I was at the APA conference in Snowmass, and I think you were too. Didn't see you, but you were there. Beautiful place.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
gorgeous.
yes.
Anyway, we'll talk about that later. I went to the workshop for commissioners, and we were talking about comp plans a little bit. And 2 guys from Aspen were there, 2 planning commissioners from Aspen were there, and they have a lot bigger issues than we do. You got multi-million-dollar projects, and, but they have the same problems. They're just bigger. But one of the things that was stressed, and we all know this, is that whatever the comp plan says, hopefully your zoning enforces it. If it doesn't, then why do you have a comp plan, or you're going to have a conflict? How do you point to the comp plan that says one thing, but the zoning doesn't allow it? Or the zoning says something different?
And that was the same thing that Jerry Dahl and Bill Detweiler emphasized in Golden a month ago. It was exactly that. It's got to work together.
Yeah. They're documents that are to be used in concert. If this is general comment session, and the other thing I learned at the conference, or Don Elliott from Clarion, who knows a lot about city regulations and stuff, talked about how cities are experiencing, because of the economy, because of the cost of living and housing and all that, that cities are experiencing developers who want to come in and put small houses on lots. And that cities need to think about, this is kind of a side subject, need to think about whether your zoning would allow a developer to come in and do a little cottage neighborhood that maybe has 600 square foot buildings on it. And he even used an example of a 400 square foot building that some developers are trying to put into areas, but some jurisdictions have minimum building size. And so as we change with the economy and the way the housing industry is changing, you have to constantly look at your zoning code and see if you're adapting to what developers are hoping to do, and whether or not your community wants to do it also. So
it's funny because one of the things Brad Calvert was talking about when he was talking about this aging in place thing for Dr. Cog at that same seminar was the increasing need for accessory dwelling units, which we pretty steadfastly prohibit in our current zoning.
What was that comment?
Accessory dwelling units.
Oh,
I think we
long-
talked about it a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago. You got a little
Yeah. Yeah.
garage apartment where your kids live in right after they're out of school and can't afford
Right.
to go anyplace. And then as the parents age and don't need the space, they move into the garage apartment and the kids move into the house, that kind of thing.
That's one item, but also could be, rent out to,
Right.
Joe Schmo who you never met before.
No, it's all part of this diversity in housing
Yeah.
types and household profiles that we've been
See, that
talking
could be
about for
that could be
6
a
months.
goal within our housing
Policy.
section.
Yeah.
So now how does that play out in the code?
What can we do? What are the implications or the consequences, intended or otherwise? Yeah.
I noticed
It's
that,
a hell of a landmine issue, especially with 90% of our community steadfast in wanting to keep their residential zoning just as it is. You'd be tarred and feathered.
Right, and that's when we get into this
Down the
whole
road,
issue
maybe not.
that Cherry Creek North dealt with scrape-offs and pop-tops and conversions from one style
Within the
to
existing
another.
code.
Right.
Yeah. Within the existing code, so it wasn't something that each developer wanted to, take an R1, make an R3 out of it.
And that points out the fact that we can't bury our heads in the sand and say, if we don't bring it up, it won't come up, because it's going to come up.
Well, once the comp plan is completed, would it be a logical follow-on then that we'd be reviewing the sections of the zoning to make sure that they're consistent with that, and also pick up other potential issues that are associated with trends, and maybe those trends could be brought into the comp plan so that they're identified, and then that supports zoning changes?
And that's what we said with this, and that's what we said before we even got to an actual document, is once we've got the vision and the overall strategy, you've got to go back and revisit, as Dahl was saying, you've got to revisit and make sure the documents are consistent. If you've got to adjust the documents and the downtown design standards and guidelines and the procedures, you do it. I mean, one of the reasons we undertook the revision of this in the first place was, A, it wasn't really appropriate. Some of what it said wasn't appropriate to current conditions, and B, there were things in here that just aren't consistent with zoning.
well, you could have a goal that allows for the smaller footprint housing, and then somebody comes in with a PD and just writes their own code within their development zone.
That's the whole idea of a PUD, or...
And they point to the comp plan and say, this is what you wanted, so we're going to give it to you right here in this PD.
Absolutely.
So,
So you don't have to wait for the whole code.
yeah.
That's an evolution of what we're doing. It's not really an abrupt change. It's just an evolution of the whole PD or PDO approach.
I did look at the different plans and
Oh,
the
good.
different links, and I noticed that a lot of the comp plans had started with the values. And I was curious, is when you mentioned like a dynamic Littleton, a livable Littleton, an outdoor Littleton, is that what you're,
Very similar. I think the principles and what we were referring to them over values, I think,
Okay.
same thing. Yeah,
okay, so principles,
yeah.
values?
I think so,
okay.
yeah, typically. I think it's a great way to just kind of pull out those key ideas. Very similar, I think, in some ways to a vision statement in terms of what we want the community to be, but it has a little bit more action to it somehow. So.
Okay.
Should it link to those?
There's going to be some real similarities. Some of that is very operational based, though, too, but
Shorter term, I think, yeah.
Well, throw out number one, not to demean having a sound fiscal government, but a safe place to work and play, is that captured in here? A public infrastructure, I assume that to mean parks and public spaces. Quality, that's a loaded word. Balanced, sustainable economy, one thing that is missing from here is the economic.
Well, we got our sustainability down in the
Yeah,
bottom,
you
so environmentally
Money's last.
sustainable. Right.
I think Randy hit on it. Randy hit on what we have to keep in mind with that. It isn't a question of necessarily incorporating all that, but there has to be no inconsistency.
absolutely.
We can't conflict with it.
It needs to, they all need to reinforce each other. The comp plan, the zoning code, the council goals and objectives, it all has to be reinforcing.
Well, when I was looking at the different comprehensive plans, it seemed like Frisco is a very simple, almost like a template comprehensive plan. Like it could be any city. Like it almost was so generic that it wasn't city specific enough. Like because everything felt like it sounded pretty good, and you could almost take that as just a template for another city. in Colorado. I mean, because there's...
They actually won an award from APA for their plan, for their public process, for that.
Which may mean we need to take it one step further and start looking at the detailed
Yes,
areas.
the
Okay,
detail,
I see,
yeah.
I see where you're going.
Yeah, because now Golden was a little longer, and I thought it had more detail to it. But it was nice because it was still short enough, I could still read through it and understand it. And I thought residents could actually read it. Like, it was actually not just...
There's a concept.
You don't want that, do we? People knowing what's going on in their city?
Because some of these, when you do get into them, I mean, they're well-written for planners to work and developers and architects and, I mean, landscape architects to look at it. But, I mean, as a resident to dive into it, it's somewhat intimidating to go through a Fort Collins, 170-plus page document. So, and I was also just thinking about the length and the detail, being that it's in-house. And I just was looking at Fort Collins, and there's a lot of consultants that go with it to produce 170 pages. And just really looking at wanting to make sure it's long enough that we have enough detail, but short enough that we can really understand it, our residents can understand it, we can read it all, and in kind of one sitting that we can really absorb it and not have to go section by section like in Thornton and try to piece it together. But the one thing about Golden that was interesting is they really did try to tie their values directly to their goals and their strategies. And I thought that was really well done, that they had a mission that they were going to achieve, this is what our residents want, and here's what resulted from that. And I also liked how at the end you had brought up the metrics. They had this continually measuring comprehensive plan progress, and they were thinking of doing like a community survey where kind of a thumbs up of we're improving, it's stable or declining, just to get a read on residents of are we doing well on our values? Are we achieving what we set out to do, or are things getting worse?
Or is it just empty promises and you're not
Empty
really
promises.
following it? Yeah.
Yes. The other thing I did like about Wheat Ridge is comprehensive plan, and yes, it was longer, but they were very honest and action-oriented. I mean, they just said it how it was. Like, if something wasn't working, they just said it's not working, or the city must make dramatic changes to make this happen, and kind of lay out, describe a couple things of how that might happen. And because of that, I think for example, their 38th Avenue corridor that's in progress for revitalization, I mean, that was in their comp plan. Here it is. That was 2009. Here it is 2012, and they are actively implementing it. It's happening. So this is a very active document, and I hope that our document that comes out of this, I like the transformative projects or transformative replace projects with something else, but to have transformative ideas that are really going to change our city for the better, and to have that out there so that we don't lose it. So, but anyway, I like some of the detail going in a bit more than the Frisco for sure, because it just seems like it's so generic that I want a little more depth to point at and be able to get some action going to move towards. So I think that was, and I liked some of the graphics too, like areas of stability, areas of change, targeted infill and redevelopment areas. I think that gives a pretty good signal for someone who is looking at investing in the city, or where would that be? And I also thought was interesting in Frisco, they included a town services map. And I thought that was really neat to show they had schools, they had parks, they had parking, they even included restrooms, public restrooms. I mean, they had amenities within the city that residents would probably look at that map and say, oh, well, where's this, where's that? And in relationship to where I live or my business. So I thought that was a neat map that you wouldn't normally get in a comprehensive plan that's a little bit more resident-based, but also visioning where things are going to be maybe located next to. So, but yeah, that was some of my, I mean, and some of the other stuff is pretty, for maps, like land use and zoning. But I also did like in Wheat Ridge, they had a structure plan with targeted corridors and activity centers. Like they really actually had a plan that said, we're going to focus on this. We're going to do this here. And I also like that. Again, it's starting to get to that action.
And Centennial has the same kind of approach,
Okay,
a network of action, or of activity centers.
okay. But I like that. It lets the community know, like, we're looking at these areas, and we want to see something happen that's exciting. So.
When you first mentioned that, it reminded me of Kennedy in '62 saying, we're going to put a man in space, we're going to land on the moon before the end of the decade. 1969, they did it. So it was one of those, what you call transformative other working projects. It was one of the, boom, and it was a goal, everybody had their eye on the prize, and they did it. So that could...
But by verbalizing it,
Yes.
there's a better chance of happening.
Yeah.
I think that fits well into, I think, the type of comp plan that we have. There are some jurisdictions where the city is still growing. So they have growth boundaries and, where the future land use is going to be and which way is it going to go. Well, Littleton's fairly built out. So now we're looking at either filling in the gaps or improving some of the deterioration or I think of transformative potential, areas that have potential for transformation. You could do asterisks or you could do bubbles and things like that. But then you could actually identify projects because we already have the infrastructure. We already have the fabric of our community in place. We just need to find areas where we might be lacking connectivity, we might be lacking public services, whatever it might be. And so you could begin to inventory it easily through GIS or whatever we have, and then look at our goals and see where we might fill in those gaps and target potential areas.
Yeah, I think you're going to see, if you did that sort of areas of stability and areas of change exercise with the map of Littleton, probably 80 to 90% of the city is going to be an area of stability, and then automatically you're going to find those areas that have the potential to be transformative or for change. I think something that Jen touched on that I've been thinking about is that this process, I think, should be more graphical, that we can, if we could use maps and, roll out a big map and use a really broad pencil, drawing the lines around areas so that it's not excluding or it's those amoeba-like forms. I think it would be helpful for us to really understand where the issues are in our community instead of talking about them broadly. Where are those, the areas of different characters? How are the neighborhoods evolving or evolved? They probably are different than they were in '81 or have the potential to be different. And, if we could, and I think when we did the downtown area plan, we didn't really do a lot of mapping until we got Sarah Jane involved and she came up with those layers. That was so helpful. It kind of galvanized the whole conversation.
And it helps tell a story. It really does. Yeah.
So, we were wrestling with words for so long, and then we're visual people. You see it on a map, and it's like, wow, yeah.
I could see the maps in some photos, but I see some of these look like they're just an exercise in color photography. They pad the document. You don't have to write as much, so you get it done easier.
Yeah.
Colorful.
I hope we avoid that.
Yeah.
We don't need all the doggone pictures.
So yes, Senator Kirk said, where's the bang for the buck areas? Where are the biggest wins, the place we can make the greatest impact in the shortest amount of time, with frankly the least amount of effort?
It's like with the metrics, Andrew.
But by improving that corner, by improving that region, by improving that shopping center, within a 5 to 10 year plan, we can transform that area.
I'd like to reinforce what Craig was saying about, areas of stability. I think if we had a map that identified areas of stability and the definition of that meant there's really not a whole lot we're going to do there, that might give some residents some comfort that they're not going to touch this area. They might have questions about the edge of it or some other place, but at least the blanket policy doesn't necessarily apply to areas of stability.
But there are two exceptions that are unavoidable. I mean, whether we want to stop it or not, we can't. One is what happens around those margins.
Right.
Especially as we start taking a proactive approach toward commercial areas and greenways and transportation circulation. But the other one is, as Mark pointed out, there are some trends headed our way, or that we've been dodging for a generation now, that we don't have any control over under the current zoning code. I mean, people can go off and do the pop-tops and scrape-offs and change in style of the housing that was built in the 50s and 60s or wherever, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we better be looking at where that's coming and how we respond to it. How does that change the character that we think the neighborhood has? Because what it has now, as pop-tops or scrape-offs become more common, it isn't going to have 20 years from now. So we've got to be thinking about that. The whole idea of planning is to anticipate.
You know, I wonder, I was just thinking as Craig was mentioning, trying to get things more graphic as far as getting ideas out there, and I wonder if our retreat isn't more charrette-based, where we have a lot of maps, we're overlaying paper, we're getting ideas out there, and working on perhaps some of the working diagrams that might be in the comprehensive plan, just to get a start of thinking about those areas.
I would love to have a session like that. I'm a maps guy.
I like all the maps.
I guess the question is for, Dennis, does that help? I mean, does that
I
help
think it
you?
helps a lot, because I think it goes both ways. I think we can then take text out of that, then we get a story, in terms of what are we trying to achieve, but it gets us a long way down the road, I think,
But the other thing I'm going to suggest, and that is given, we've got a lot of expertise and experience around this table in slightly different but overlapping areas. So I'd suggest before we'd sit down to that seminar or whatever, if each of us would just go out and look around the commercial and the retail and the residential and open space areas and look for things that we think suggest, wait a minute, I didn't notice that before. What's going on here? Is this changing? I mean, I didn't notice that the area south of or southeast of ACC is suddenly starting to show more remodel add-ons and in character, as opposed to another area where it's more modern. Look for the things that stand out, and then we come in and share and say, okay, here's what I'm seeing that says we may think it's stable. It isn't necessarily. Just compare notes on what catches our eye.
Take pictures.
And take pictures. Absolutely.
Can I tell you just a little story? The best, I've been on 10 retreats, okay? The best one was the first one that I ever went on. We were told to go out and take pictures of different kinds of architecture we'd like to see, because we were looking at it as a Santa Fe corridor study. Everybody was taking pictures. I walked the Santa Fe corridor up and down, walked it, not just drove it. But anyway, came in with pictures, we had maps, and we were just on, everything was pasted up, and we were just flying. It was a charrette day. It was the most amazing day of my 10 years on the Planning Commission. It was marvelous. If we could recreate that with pictures and visuals and maps. You load the maps, great.
You're nominated
We got a lot out of it. We were exhausted by it.
The whole idea being to stimulate and challenge and put you off balance, so you have to change your perspective a little bit and be creative.
Yeah, so to me, if you seem as a tinge of fear in pop-top scrape-offs, I consider it to be a grand opportunity. That's my perspective.
And it can be either, depending on what your perspective is, if you're right next door.
I was driving through the neighborhood off of Prince by Stern Park, and it's happening.
As it should.
Yeah, it's been happening slowly for
The value of the land is
decades.
there's more value in the land than there is in the homes there.
Yeah.
It's going to happen invariably. It'll happen around Kettering Park.
Right on Sycamore, just north of Main Street, somebody's taking out a house and bringing in another single-family house.
Yeah.
Building it to live there, right next to the bar.
Right next
You know,
to it.
there's,
Right next, there you go.
Yeah.
there's two of my fears. Is one, what happens to the rub zone, what happens to the perimeter. The second fear is what happens to deteriorating residential. Housing has a lifespan.
And
And if
when
you
we
don't
start
keep improving it, the community dies.
And when we start talking about housing diversity, smaller houses in clusters or otherwise, or smaller multifamily housing, there's a trend going in the urban areas now for younger people, recent college graduates. They don't need a big apartment. They just want a place to crash. Otherwise, they're going to be out with their friends. They're going to be working. They're going to be outside doing activities. it's almost the old Japanese, little tube that you park your belongings and sleep in, and otherwise you're out doing things. Well, but we need to start thinking about, okay, does it make sense to let somebody come in and do that in an area where there's not a lot of support facilities around? No stores nearby, no access to public transportation. How are we going to make sure that those things mesh together in the right place at the right time with the right connections?
We have a case coming up that a lot of people know about, the Nevada place, where they're coming in to increase the density because of the market. And one of the other things they talked about, Don talked about at the conference, was some builder developers are doing multifamily units where young, professional, single people are renting 300, 200 square feet, a bed, a kitchenette, and a door. And then right next door is a one-bedroom apartment. They're mixing up unit types or size of units within a building. It doesn't look any different from outside. It just has more people inside. But they don't have a car. They have a bicycle. So they don't have a parking spot. Things are changing in terms of how people are living.
That's not aging in place. That's maturing or evolving in place. And it's the same thing. They like the idea of being downtown Littleton with all the activity, with the light rail, with the park and all the recreational activities. Right now, they're single. They're just trying to get established. 3 years from now, maybe they're cohabitating or they've got a live-in, and after that, they have a kid. But they want to stay where they are. So create the opportunities for them to be able to do that.
Not the trend.
Well, maybe the goal for the retreat would be to identify those 4 transformative actions, if we want to call them that, and the mapping comes out of that, or vice versa. And then we've got kind of consensus amongst us of what those major big actions are going to be.
I'm going to suggest that first we start looking at what are the trends, problems, evolutions that we think we're going to have to address, and then come up with the transformative as a solution or as an approach or response to that, rather than trying to look at transformative things we could do and then try and fit them to problems.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Dennis's suggestion where we identify the issues first and then
Tailor responses.
So that's that section here called challenges and opportunities, and a lot of that came from there's some of the data that Dennis, you brought to the table, even as part of the Inspire Littleton, as well as some of the things that probably came out of the Inspire Littleton. So I feel like there's probably something we can even begin to work with that already has those challenges and opportunities laid out for us.
And Littleton 2030 took that approach. That was one of their organizing principles, was looking not just for areas of stability and change, but for challenges and opportunities. Which way did the sword cut both ways?
I think if we can take that information and study that, and then from there begin to identify, then what are some transformative actions to either take advantage of some of these opportunities or address some of the challenges?
I'm not sure that we can come up with the transformative actions as much as we can maybe anticipate what might be coming. Because I don't know how much of it is proactive and how much is
brainstorming around what might be transformative. I don't know that we can come.
right. Yeah.
Well, some of our conversations, I think, have been around them, and that's, the population is aging, the incomes are going down, we have shopping centers that are losing market.
The answer may can't come out easily, easier than we think.
Yeah.
Let's just not develop myopia about that. I mean, yeah, the population is aging. How much longer is that going to go on? Yeah, the incomes are dropping. How much longer is that going to go on? If the overall economy improves, if any place is going to turn around fast, it's Littleton, because that's where it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not going to suddenly change our character and be an area of slow growth, slow development, uneducated. It ain't going to happen. So let's just be careful about trying to adopt this if this goes on, and not look at what if it doesn't go on any longer.
But some of the issues are more long-term. I think the change in retail versus residential use, that's...
Change in automobile use, change in the number of people doing online shopping and ordering instead of going out to retail. I was reading something in The Economist last week. They were talking about younger people being more inclined to do their socializing through the internet gaming and that sort of thing, instead of getting in a car and driving across town to someplace else. Those are trends that are going to be coming along our way, and we're going to have to deal with them. So you may be right. We may spend all of our time looking at the surprising things that we've noticed immediately around us and in society as a whole. But I agree with Glenn. I think by the time we finish that, we're going to be so stimulated, we're going to start thinking of some of the things we've talked about that might be transformative and say, how would that mesh with what we were just talking about, this whole melange of trends and dynamic change. So I like the idea.
Want to, Dennis, continue to go through? Do we want to make sure we're all in agreement on these
I think so,
principles?
yeah, because the next thing is on your page 3, you actually have the guiding principles and relevant goals and policies. So I went through on this one, well, actually on page 2, I guess, the guiding principles. Let's do that one, sorry. So this is what you've seen before. I've revised them a little bit. It's going to be an ongoing revision, I think, just to make sure that we're saying what we're hearing and what you guys want to say. We have 7 guiding principles at the moment. A dynamic Littleton with land use strategies to shape the future. Livable Littleton, diverse housing options for a dynamic community. An outdoor Littleton, capitalizing on existing parks, trails, and open space. Number 4, a Littleton with vibrant downtown, economic vitality and prosperity at the city center. Number 5, a connected Littleton, mobility and connectivity, and still would drive me a little crazy because they're not parallel. Number 6, a distinctive Littleton urban design principles to create dynamic spaces. And number 7, a sustainable Littleton for Andrew, feasible solutions for an environmental and economically maintainable city life. So that's kind of where we're heading. I guess the question is, are we missing something major? Are we missing a major category of information that we need to be hitting at this level? Is there something we haven't done that you think we should, or is there something on here that you think we shouldn't be addressing? You know, to some degree, parks and open space, we have a special district. Yeah, we have South Suburban. So it's not as much in our realm as it is in South Suburban's realm to do that plan, but at the same time, there's a strong role of the city in that. So.
I wonder with the economic vitality, it's specifically connected with downtown, which is good. Mm-hmm. Are we going to be bringing up the economic vitality of other parts of the city, and where would that go?
We kind of struggled because it does, we fit it under number 7, and so trying to broaden the idea of what a sustainable community is. It's not just environmental, it's making sure we have a good tax base so we can provide good services. But maybe it should be broken out. Maybe that's a tough fit.
I think Jenny's touched on something we kept hearing on the website and at the meetings. Why do you keep talking about downtown? Isn't there any place else in Seriously.
Yeah.
And we're doing it, we're reverting back to that same thing. Downtown plays a very distinctive role, no question about it. But there are other activity centers that we ought to be talking about and figuring out how they talk about connectivity. How do they connect?
So number 4,
how do they interact?
should be broadened to more activity centers. So
With vibrant activities.
I like that, yeah.
I mean, the downtown is going to be part of the distinctive Littleton, no question about that.
Yeah.
But the rest of it is, what are the centers in Littleton, existing or potential, and how do they work together? How do they stimulate each other? How do they connect to each other?
Yeah, that does go right into a connected Littleton.
Good.
And so instead of a number 4, does number 4, or whatever we're evolving number 4 to mean, it sounds like it's actually a subset of other things. So I don't know that it necessarily needs to have its own outline here, because like we said, it actually is part of a sustainable Littleton. So downtown might be one of the components that we talk about when we talk about an economically maintainable city life. Some other city center may be another economically, oh my God, that's so hard to say. So I think one of the feedbacks that we provided, as well as some of the citizens provided, is there seems to be a lot of overlap. Like, does it really belong here or there? So I think it's not about what we've missed. I think it's where we may be being redundant, and as a result, then confusing ourselves.
Redundant as opposed to, what was the word we used? Reinforcing. connecting and reinforcing. How does this element fit with these other two? How do the three of them together affect something else?
So if we were to broaden number 7 and to include the activity centers, vibrant activity centers, is there an element of that activity center that we're not catching somewhere else other than just the economic part of it in terms of the livability? Is that part of the livable Littleton? And livable Littleton is not just the housing, maybe it's other stuff as well? Is that?
Well, under number 6, I mean, an urban fabric such as areas around transportation, TOD, whatever, can be activity centers or physical centers that have an architectural identity that is unique. Downtown is unique in its own way, but the mineral station could be unique in its day with its own identity through architectural styles and project mixed use. The whole idea of sustainability means that you don't focus on one area. You diversify into other areas so that one area may have a down decade and the next area has an up decade. That's sustainability.
We went through the same problem when we started in this. We started with the overall vision. We came up with some major points, and then we said, well, let's break off into teams. And suddenly, each team saw their particular area as widening to encompass everything. You got to keep the focus. I think Jenny started off with the right idea. If we shift away from it just downtown, although downtown plays a role as far as the distinctive Littleton, and we need to recognize that. But we start with what she was referring to earlier in some of the other urban plans, like comp plans, as a network of activity centers. And how do we connect them? How do we reinforce them? How do we recognize that they aren't all going to be the same? Everything isn't going to be downtown. Everything isn't going to be Aspen Grove. But how do you reinforce a diverse character of those activity centers that people can say, well, I was over here yesterday, but there's another place like that over here, and then we can go. That's what we ought to be focusing on. So if we convert 4 from just the downtown to vibrant activity centers, that's going to fit in with everything else.
I come back to that. Vibrant activity center to me means the same thing as economically maintainable city life. Maybe you can add another word to that, but
it isn't just economics. I mean, it's the open space, it's the family areas as well as the activities for individuals going on. Not all necessarily at the same place. It's what's going on in those. What did we say a couple of years ago? Nodes.
Yeah.
And how do they connect? And yes, all the other things play in, the economic, the open space, the connectivity, or literally connectivity, bicycle pathways and light rail and other public transportation. But let's recognize what the community's been telling us for the last 3 months. It isn't just downtown. There are areas out there right now that generate every bit as much activity as downtown. Aspen Grove comes immediately to mind. And that isn't just economic. There's a lot more going on there than economic. There are things going on there that we'd like to see more of downtown in terms of bringing people in. Family night at the theater site and that sort of thing.
And they're also going to have different scales. I think the Platte River Corridor is an activity center.
Right.
It's a recreational activity, and it generates economic benefits.
And if the city's going to start taking a more proactive role in stimulating development of commercial centers, not just retail, but commercial centers and housing around them, then you may want to, one of the transformative things we may be thinking about is what happens when somebody comes in and buys one of these larger shopping areas, say along Broadway, which is a pretty long corridor, and says, I'm going to change the character of this. It's not just going to be a retail center, and I pull in a couple of services like H&R Block every now and then because I have a vacancy. I'm going to start adding elements for residential and activities for the residents and services working for the residents.
and then those come out in the dynamic Littleton, right, as land use strategies. So I'm just struggling with then what would we put here that we wouldn't also put in other areas?
It's hard, and I guess one of my goals is, I think everybody's pretty much said it, we want a readable document. And what my pet peeve is the Thornton format where we talk about land use, we talk about transportation, but not really how they come together and create exciting spaces. So this, I really liked the words that I guess Craig came up with, you and Dennis, Craig and Dennis, and but you know, there is going to be some crossover. I'm not really sure how to do both.
They do that, I think it's Fort Collins, did a nice job with systems thinking, where they specifically said, here are the pillars that we want to have, and here's the idea, and here's how it links, or here's how this particular environmental bullet lists into all of the other sub-factors there. So certainly coming from a systems perspective, I think it doesn't hurt to have that cross-pollination of ideas.
I think it's going to flush out as we get into it. You asked what's missing. As we were talking about activity centers, I thought, well, Littleton Hospital is an employment center.
South Park Industrial Park.
The South Park Industrial Park, South Park, is an employment center, and so I don't see anything that necessarily addresses employment as a principle or a goal to develop more employment activity or opportunities in our community, because we have very few traditional office in Littleton. Not that, whether we want it or not, I don't know, but we have housing and we have recreation and a downtown, but there aren't too many employment other than South Park and some other smaller office complexes.
And kind of, I think Glenn said too, we were thinking that'd go under sustainability, but it's kind of where it goes. But we may want to pull some of those things out individually too. So.
Yeah, looking at some of the other plans, especially Fort Collins, because I think that is broken down well, they had broken out the two parts of sustainable Littleton that we had into environmental sustainable and economically sustainable. And they also had what they call a high-performing community, which I think, I didn't read that part of it, but that may get into that workplace employment center aspect of it. And I think there's enough meat in both the environmental sustainability and the economic sustainability that perhaps that could be split into two and pick up some of the, especially with the number 4, changing that to be more centers of activity, about the identity of Littleton, whereas the sustainable economics is more about the economic vibrancy, the actual.
But each of these core ideas is going to have hooks, if you will, like Velcro, that hook to some other one of it. Each one is going to hook to other ideas. So let's start with the core, make sure we got the right core ideas, and then start looking for how we acknowledge and reinforce those hooks that link them together. That's the flesh of that's the detail in the discussion.
There have been some comp plans that do matrices that show connection between other principles, and you'd have to think about how you do that, but it'd be interesting to see if there's a graphic or a way to tabulate those connected elements so that it's communicated to the community that this isn't done in isolation.
Here's the limitation we're dealing with. Anybody ever try and set up a filing system in an office or a project? You can set up a filing system 100 different ways, and you're never going to find everything falling into exactly the same, distinct categories. There's always crossover. Our problem right now is we're dealing with a 2-dimensional document, and we're talking about a 4-dimensional comprehensive plan. 3 dimensions in terms of space and everything, and 4 dimensions over time. So it's going to be hard to boil everything down into 2 dimensions. So if we start with core ideas, look for what links those core ideas, and then figure out how we're going to reinforce or enliven those connections, I think we're headed in the right direction.
Another kind of a new point to this part of the conversation, and to me it falls under connected and it falls into the workplace part of this, we failed to mention academics. And in my pipe dream, we have a school system that trains and develops people who have core skills, education, that can then go into a workforce and create economically sustainable and theoretically high-paying jobs, so that there's a direct pipeline, leadership pipeline, for lack of anything else, to create those opportunities. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but the myth of Michigan is that from age 2 you learn how to make cars, and then you grow up to run car industries.
Well, then take
There's
it the
more than
next
a
step.
myth there.
Reality.
Take it the
Reality.
next step. So we've got Littleton Public Schools, you're not going to do any better in the state,
Correct.
okay? You've got ACC, which has a lot of advantages or opportunities that nobody knows about. Okay, so is that all there is? Could we look at, education, retraining, whatever, is changing. It's evolving well beyond University of Phoenix and online stuff. So what could the city do if we're talking about the city being proactively going out after retail or employers or that sort of thing? What else could we bring in to make this education network you're talking about more complete? More opportunities for people that go beyond the K-12 public schools and the community college into focused areas of medical training or computer training that maybe go beyond or in more detail than you get it from ACC.
Or aerospace.
Or aerospace.
What do our businesses want that exist today that we could feed directly into? And then the impossible target of what are the businesses going to be, and that we could create. I had a conversation with a guy the other day about creating Beer University. Much more than just how do you brew and create, but how do you market, how do you distribute? You could bring in dollars from outside this area, which is the golden goose that we're looking for. If we can create opportunities that even get people to temporarily be here, which is what Fort Collins has so well with Colorado State University, and the Boulder Entrepreneur Pocket right now is doing so well because they have the academic institution as the foundation of all business growth that's coming out of there. Maybe that's an overstatement. I think we have gold numbers.
But there's a good place to look for that. Look at the extracurricular, the community outreach programs that ACC offers. What's attracting the most attention? Where are they getting most involvement of people coming in after hours? Not degree programs, but somebody coming in like brewing or something, that they aren't ready to develop into a full program. Is there somebody else that come in and do a little off-campus kind of thing? University of Colorado Springs has a major research program going on, and they have generated scores of small startup companies dealing with those particular areas of technology that start with one or two professors and a few students, and then they grow from that. There's no reason we couldn't start looking for that same kind of thing, maximizing the opportunities with the advantages we have now, public school, ACC, and other things, other employers and businesses, and start networking from there. No reason we couldn't do that. We've got the population.
Would it be beneficial to have a session or a time with our new economic development person to help with strategy thinking, and then possibly an administrator or somebody from ACC to talk about education? Anybody else?
Yeah, I think it's a
What are
great.
they good at? What are they training?
What are they looking for? What are they looking at?
What is the number one thing that students are applying to become? And then how do we get those businesses?
And ACC's got a great history of actually making those connections. They've got sponsorships from the auto dealerships, for example, for auto repair, and from the hospitals. They were looking at, when Dave and I were talking to them, I think a couple of years ago, they were actually talking about even having maybe a graduated set of tuition, because some of the programs, you get a degree and you generate more income almost immediately, but they're thinking about perhaps the demand in some of these programs is so great they can actually go out to the institutions, have them help subsidize the tuition programs themselves. So it's
CU Medical Center gets all the attention, right? But Randy hit on something, and actually between what both of you said, we've got ACC and its programs, we've got Littleton Hospital growing all the time, we've got a major medical center with cardiology and all sorts of things down in South Park Industrial Park. To not pull that network together and figure out how to make things blossom from that, or what the city can do to look for opportunities and encourage it, we can't do it, but if we can find out where the hot spots are, where things are the most dynamic.
And I think your suggestion's a good one. Get someone from academics as well as someone from economic development, because one of the things that ACC does have is a very competitive, top-notch nursing program. So, we're already maybe halfway there or even further than halfway there, and it's just how do you keep pushing that forward?
And the point is to link all this through a connected Littleton, saying it's not just technology connection, it is pipeline connection.
I'll just throw it out there, whether or not it has a community direct benefit, but Denver Seminary has people from all over the country. that come in.
In-
And it has
immigration
an
is
international
huge.
presence. And it's more education.
And not just what's here, but what's nearby that we could tap into, that we could fit into a network or fit into expanding a network, not just for our own community's benefit, but for Englewood's or unincorporated Jefferson County. What else is out there? Don't take a static approach and wait for somebody else to come and tell us what they want to do. Let's start talking to the ones who look like they're doing dynamic things, the university and the hospital and these offices, the medical offices down in South Park, and look for something that's going to click and say, well, then why don't we approach this, or how could we link these groups together to benefit each other?
Because, so the Denver Seminary, we just got a grant for that immigration program that we have, helping immigrants. And then, what's that new international studies that was opened up across from ACC? So again, the point is, things are naturally happening. How do we notice them and help accelerate them?
And encourage them, reinforce them, feed them, whatever.
Yep.
Including things like if we see some kind of linkage like that, forming a new center for medical training programs and that sort of thing that's going to need the kind of housing Randy was talking about earlier, smaller, more focused. They're going to come and go quickly. They don't need a lot of space because they're out in activities or in studies or in labs or that sort of thing.
And all of that comes back to transformative.
Right.
Those are the big ideas that truly are transformative, right?
How can we take advantage of all the car dealerships?
As car sales start to dwindle because nobody cares about cars anymore.
Yeah, you have a lot of car dealerships.
Well, look in the other, you want to know that another transformative.
Which is good, I guess.
There are two transformative opportunities there I can see right now. One is people who sell cars and people who make cars aren't going to just give up because younger people stop buying cars. They're going to find other ways of attracting other people with different products so they keep their sales up. That's just normal capitalism and business. The second thing is for those businesses operating on South Broadway right now who don't survive, what is our vision for how those properties are going to be redeveloped or repurposed to fit into the fabric of the community? Those are the two things we ought to be thinking about. How are the businesses that survive going to change, and what do we do to usefully fill in the voids when somebody goes out of business?
It's a great economic resource for us right now to have those businesses, but it's also a great land bank. So, yeah.
And it fits in with the housing diversity. It fits in with the activities, the different nodes or activities.
Most of the
centers.
dealerships from Littleton Boulevard South have been renovated or new in the last 5-10 years.
And remember, the big trend that we're looking at here, that we're riding the wave of, is everything was Euclidean and land use based, and now we're moving to form and fabric and character and activities and connectedness. That isn't going to change anytime soon. So that ought to be the underlying theme through everything we're looking at.
So the last thing, or maybe not last thing I got. Cool, hip, unique, artsy, fun. Maybe that's what's implied in vibrant. But back to the point of if we write this for a bunch of city planners, the public's going to fall asleep. If we write this in a way that, in essence, we're writing the newspaper headlines we want to see in a year, then we're on the right path. What is somebody going to look at this and say, wow, they got some neat stuff going on down there?
No, I see that under number one. And, I wrote down a dynamic Littleton, and I said, really? Next to it, it's like, yeah, it could be, but it's not. And does it really want to be? Did the people of Littleton really want it to be a dynamic place? I think a dynamic is rapidly changing, skyscrapers, and I don't think that people want
different
that.
definitions of
Cool.
dynamic.
I bet you'll find people around here who will say that to them Littleton is dynamic because of what they can do without having to go very far.
What does that mean? Cool, what is hip, right? That's been debated for
Hip and trendy change from day to day. That's like asking what style, how wide the lapels on a man's jacket are this year as opposed to 3 years from now, or what kind of high patterns.
Just hold on to your jacket, it'll be good.
Well, I've been holding on to hundreds of times hoping that would happen. It hasn't happened. No, I know what you mean by dynamic. I think of dynamic as being, I like the housing situation, my cave, if you will. I like how it relates or interfaces with the other caves surrounding it, similar or different. I like the fact that people around me are both older than I am and younger than I am, with more kids and fewer kids. Well, you can't have fewer kids. I like the fact that I can walk over to the Highline Canal in no time at all, and jog or bicycle or just sit around and stare. I like the fact that the Buck Center isn't far away, that I can, if I have to, I can walk down to the grocery store and other shopping. I can walk to Light Rail. I can walk to Aspen Grove. I can walk to the Platte River. That's dynamic. There are things going on in town, whether I'm feeling like I want to go out and exercise or be outside or with other people, or I can go and feed my mind at the Littleton Museum or take a class at ACC. That, to me, is dynamic. It isn't necessarily, it's change in that I find new things to challenge myself, I find new things to interest me, and I can find most of them, or at least parts of them, in Littleton. That's dynamic to me.
Yes, and I think of it as a place that's changing. It's where you risk losing some of that because it's going to change. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And, maybe there's and I hate to wordsmith, but maybe there's a different way of saying that, maybe it's an engaging Littleton, or, a great, I don't know, great is too broad, but, just a great place to be type of thing. I mean,
Who's the author that wrote Washington Square? Anybody remember? It was late 1800s. He said, one of the characters in there said that what a person needs is something useful to do and something challenging to learn. That's the core of life. And Littleton, to me, provides that. Maybe what we need to focus on is how do we make more of that available or evident in Littleton for a wider variety of people. Young, old, families, singles, retired, whatever. Just something to think about.
Some of the things that you were describing, though, to me, felt like you were trying to articulate that it's connected, you were trying to articulate that it's livable. So, again, the word dynamic seems to encompass all those things, which I think it can, but then we just say it's about land use. So that I, too, struggle with this word, and is it in the right place? And is it truly a principle, or maybe it's part of our vision or goal? I'm not sure where it belongs.
It's like quality. What's it mean? So find another word. Keep the essence of what we're talking about.
And I think we have some of those other words. I mean, the only word I don't see here is unique. And Jenny brought this out when she was talking about the Frisco plan, that it seemed too watered down and there was nothing unique about it that you can identify where it is.
Dennis used distinctive instead of unique. So.
I think.
And I think that's true, though, because it's, you want people to think of Littleton and picture and recognize Littleton versus any other place, and what makes it distinctive for you.
Community development comes to mind.
What does?
Community development, and that meaning as encompassing as that could possibly be. Human community development, land use community development, economic community development, just as a broad stroke there.
What staff tried to do with the meetings and the input from the website was try and get all those ideas and the input to coalesce into core elements, facets of, for lack of a better word, a dynamic, rewarding life in Littleton. So now what we have to do is, Dennis, this started off when Dennis asked the question, maybe we missed something, think about what we might have missed. And so let's go back to that. If these are the major ornaments you hang on your Christmas tree, is there something missing to really flesh out the picture? And then you can sit there and see how each of them adds to the overall effect. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. Randy used the word fabric, community fabric or development fabric or something like that 10 minutes ago. And that's really what we've been talking about that for 4 years now. We need to keep talking about that because in the end, it is the fabric. And not every piece of it's going to appeal to everybody, like a piece of paisley. Everybody's not going to like all of it, but you find something in it for everybody.
It's a layering of fabric. It's not just the streets, it's the culture, it's the architecture, it's the people, it's the parks, it's the economy, it's...
It's the 4 dimensions,
Yeah.
not flat.
Right. This is kind of hokey, but I like hokey. You've been places where you see signs and it says, if you lived here, you'd be home by now, for the commuters. So I thought, okay, if you live here, you'd be part of our community already, or something like that, you know. Like if you live here, you got everything you need. You don't have to go very far. That kind of idea that in Littleton, you don't have to go very far to get what you want.
And we played around with that idea 4 years ago when we were starting to develop the original, what do we call it? Every group starts off deciding they have to have a vision and a brand.
Mission statement.
Mission statement, there you go. And that's what we flirted around with, and we never could get it.
I don't know how it fits into a comp plan, but...
Mission cliche.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem.
But, you know, what Glenn just said, it's the brand, what is the brand of Littleton? What would people say, what do we want people to say about Littleton? It comes back to what is the fabric of our community, but it's, what is the branding?
It's right there. It says to preserve a family-oriented and economically vibrant community that encourages citizen involvement, respects diversity, values community character, and enhances the quality of life of Littleton residents and visitors.
I have trouble picturing that in my head. Yeah.
It only took us an hour and a half.
Just keep in mind, if a brand implies something simple and straightforward and it says everything, and then you start talking about diversity and complexity, and it's like brand starts getting diffused. So maybe we need to come up with different words or a different...
I liked Randy's
Image.
idea, but I'd turn it on its end a little bit and say something like, you can go far by staying here.
Hey.
Way.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we have to find, right?
Yeah.
Now that would then drive some of the things, because there's certain pockets of where we've missed, where if people really don't want to have to go far, that it would need to be here. And it wouldn't be in Highlands Ranch, and it wouldn't
Right.
be over somewhere else. So, no, seriously, I mean...
No,
but if-
I'm just thinking, for what we've been saying, what we're really trying to do is find a credible,
because-
not laughable way of
Yeah.
saying everything for everybody.
Well, because, and actually the other thing too is that there's not a lot of people, there's a low percentage of people who actually live and work in the city. So here again, there's a pocket of opportunity. So if that's our vision and that's our goal, then there's a lot of things that feed into that to make that a reality.
So how many of us sitting around this table live and work in Littleton?
Slackers.
I think you might be surprised at how many people...
How many of you live in Eden?
You have time to eat?
I have to admit that I go to Southland a lot because it's a dynamic place, and it's becoming more so. They're building more places. They just got a big Navy, some Old Navy.
Oh, they did?
They're putting Old Navy in.
We closed the one at
But
University in
if Aspen evolved, Aspen Grove, and the property across the street, what is it called?
Ensor.
If that became something comparable, that would draw people there. Those are our places, you know. Marathon Oil is a little close to South Bend, they'd compete, but, yeah, places that draw people, keep them here.
Education ties into it really well, too.
So a lot of this is some good discussion. I think a lot of this can set a framework for our retreat. So should we talk about potential dates for that? You know, I think we want to do it before we get into the holidays.
Holidays as of, when's Thanksgiving this year? Early?
Early.
Is it?
Yeah. November
22nd.
19th or?
22nd.
What is it, 22nd? Okay.
Short of everybody flashing their calendars, is there a way on the web that we could use like I don't know the name of the site, but one of those Dropbox sites that you put out some dates and everybody checks some boxes on it? And we just
There's
fly
that
through this
meetup,
quickly?
which I haven't figured out how to use yet, but there is a software, I think that's free, that everybody puts in their dates and it kind of figures out.
I can find out, I'm meeting with a guy tomorrow that does this all the time. I'll just find out the name of the site he uses and I'll forward it to you.
Okay.
Great, okay, we'll send it
We
out.
can do that.
Cool.
Does city staff have a calendar coordination
We do.
internal?
We're on Outlook, yeah, so we can
Is
coordinate.
there
our
any way
calendars.
we could set up that sort of thing for the individual boards as well?
Well, you couldn't, I mean, I send meeting notices to other people's calendars that are also on Outlook outside the city, and it works. I think we could do something comparable, probably, yeah.
What's the form we're trying to set up? Are we trying to set up a full
Yeah.
6-hour, 8-hour to 4 hours? So if we, can we at least agree to that, and then we try to find a time slot?
Is there a strong preference that way? It seems like we might get the most done in a day.
Mark spoke to the intensity of a,
Whole weekend, up in Breckenridge.
well, we don't have a budget for that. We may not have a budget for Littleton Museum.
How about that?
Well, we've done in the past, Littleton Museum,
Museum has
a
been nice. Yeah, they've
day,
been very
have
generous.
lunch,
Garden.
maybe a guest speaker or two,
Which is nice.
and, the guest speaker or two maybe, more about talking to economic development or.
And it is a
from
public
ACC.
meeting. We actually have had people show up to sit there and, every now and then, somebody more than just Tom, but it's happened.
So was that a 1 day or 2 days?
I think one.
Or day and a
We've
half
done
day?
one, yeah, and even a full day is hard. We've done usually, 6 hours or so, I think.
Yeah. By about
From 9
3:30,
until 3:30 or 4.
by about 3:30, you start feeling overstimulated and drained, squeezed.
And it's hard to ask anybody to get before about 9, I think, on Saturday morning,
Or-
too, so. Usually do something.
And maybe take the next Monday night off.
Right, right.
No, what Saturdays do we have between now and Thanksgiving? Like,
Well, there's 2 or 3 in November. I think, just for advance notice, we're probably looking at November now, early November, first, second
and
weekend.
we'll have about 3 Saturdays in November
The
before
3rd,
Thanksgiving.
10th, and, yeah.
17th.
I thought we were going to have a case at our next meeting, but we do not. That got pushed into November. So your agendas are going to start picking up with standard zoning cases in November on for a while. The other thing I just want to throw out is we have Mind Mixer till the end of the year. So that's still a tool if we still want to use it for these purposes.
So if we could come up with some stimulating concept or things that occur to us during this workshop and then could get them out there through Mind Mixer and get
You bet.
feedback, that would be
And
good.
people-
So we know we're not outliers going way out in left field
And so
somewhere.
are some of those things that, are you referring to those things as those transformative ideas?
Could be, or just things that occurred to us. We haven't talked about. So I think there'd be the focus. Things that didn't come up in the meetings or in the website up to now. And says, we got to talking about what we had heard from everybody, and here's some of the things that stuck on the wall. And we'd like to get some feedback on this. Maybe it's a similar idea, but from a little different perspective, or it's merging a few ideas, or it's responding to some of the ideas, just to get some reaction.
The important thing that I would like to have happen at this retreat, that there's output from it. It's not just presentations or just talking. So if we can make sure we
need something to kind
structure.
of start building on as far as staff. That's what we'd like to be doing.
And that could come from having somebody who's there to keep the discussion, linear is the wrong word. I mean, we're going to be wide-ranging, but sooner or later, that person's got to bring us back. Okay, so what are you saying here as a group? What are the big ideas we want to capture? And get it on a board or a palette or something, so that afterwards, we've got the same kind of thing that Jenny kept coming up with on the scribble sheets and on the public forums, the meetings, the activity meetings before our discussions. We've got some tangible product, and we can boil it down and decide what to throw out there on the Mind Mixer to get some reaction to.
So facilitators, what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Possible.
Not tell us where to go, but say, okay, you were started in this direction, let's get back to that, and what are the essential ideas You beat it to death, you're circling
How
back.
do we use this, right? So how do we start filling in the blanks, or at least understand what do we have versus what we don't have as we work through this session? So that we just start putting
Yeah.
stuff on.
Well, I think we could, if it would be helpful, under these subject headings, we could throw everything we've gotten from the Mind Mixer site under these somewhat in categories. That's what kind of created these core ideas, is the themes that kind of ran through.
I've started doing that on the last 2 pages, but I think with the discussion tonight, there's a lot of change, I think, needs to be made to those as well, so, but, yeah.
Yeah.
Very well.
I don't know if there are shorts and bunch over which bucket it goes into. I just like to see everything out there between Mind Mixer and the community meetings and the scribble sheets and the kid comments and, everything that we
In a
possibly
war room kind of set up and,
throw it all on the wall and just make sure all the ideas are there. And then we can start wordsmithing it together.
How many managed to make the meeting, the last forum we had over or in here? Because I didn't, I was out of town.
Yeah, there were a couple of us there. Yeah.
Do we have any kind of synopsis of what was talked about, put together, notes or something?
Yeah,
That we can all look at? That would help.
I suppose to that same point, yes, I'm sorry for interrupting, Mark. To the same point, I'd love to see it categorized. I'd just as soon have the data vomit as well, because that's going to spur each of us to go in our own directions.
And it is amazing amount of information, so we definitely can get it out, but yeah, so
Get it out.
try and synthesize it.
It's okay,
But I think it's great if you.
we'll all filter it individually.
Yeah,
and come up with
absolutely, and pick
perspectives.
out what you want to look through, but yeah, there's a ton of stuff.
You're
Yeah,
going
Craig's gonna get it all down.
to get out this big list before our retreat?
Could we do
Yeah.
some pre-work before we get to the meeting,
Get it
so
at
if we have,
3:50 the day after.
so if we have some
Saturday morning
information,
at
and maybe we put together some, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just call out, okay, all the ones work on this, so we're not all trying to do the same thing, and we break out into maybe 4 little groups and say, okay, we're going to take this part of the information or that part of the information, so we give more insight and depth to the raw data, so that it's not just raw data, like we've done some analysis around it, and we can bring it to the team.
Because it's thousands and thousands of entries at this point, so.
You might get more mileage if each of us looked at it and said, okay, I think I get a sense for what's going on, but city staff, could you bring us in some insight about, how this would work, or what the consequences of that would be, or what would reinforce, if this is what we want to do in this part of town, what would contribute to that as opposed to working counter to it? Just throw some ideas at staff and say, look, what can you tell us about this mechanism or that consequence or that sort of thing?
I think what I heard is that perhaps you could come with, from Mind Mixer, fill in the blanks here, what you've already started to do, with a whole list of potential goals and maybe policies under each one of these headings, and let us then, maybe break out and say, okay, well, what does this mean? And instead of us trying to go through all the input and try to discern.
I think it's about when I think about insights, is from all of the data, what does that data now tell us? What are the insights coming from that data? And not just the words, it tells us we should improve our housing, but then put a couple of bullets of data points that support that statement, so that everyone's on the same page, and it's not, oh, well, that means this to me, or that means that. No, the data or the stats tell you that we have housing vacancy of X, and that's why we've defined this insight, or that's how we've concluded on this insight.
I don't know if it's that quantitative, though, in the input that we received from Mind Mixer. It's a lot of opinions that you kind of have to discern.
It's a lot of swirling
into,
around.
and there's a couple ideas in one statement, too, so.
But there's another aspect of it that's the
But there's two
demographic.
pieces, though, right? So it's what the constituents are saying. So 70% of the constituents said parking is a problem, okay? And then we have some, kind of independent data that can quantify or not. Well, our parking is 3 per, and it's probably not this level of detail, but there's the insights that we have based on feedback, and that's just maybe a percentage number, like the percentages that you showed, versus then independent data that you guys have captured that's about Denver, that's about the state, that's about Littleton, that just brings the two together, because one alone doesn't give you the full picture. It's the concrete data and then the subjective opinions.
How do you make sense of it, essentially?
I think it's about, making sure, that you have both sides. It's the art and the science, right? The art and the science.
And you can put it in perspective. This is an intriguing idea, but only one person mentioned it, but this is something that kept coming up over and over again. Do they mesh, or are they totally antithetical? How do we make sense of it all?
So what, I guess, would be a reasonable amount of information for us to have beforehand to be prepared to come into and really get some work done?
Yeah, the stuff on Mind Mixer, I think, is probably the easiest stuff, because we can do spreadsheets off of that. And it's a summary of the information, but it's good. It's not organized in the way that we would organize it necessarily, but I think it's good information for it. The tougher stuff is, all the comments we've gotten in meetings and the sticky notes and all that stuff is a little tougher to kind of make some sense of.
The kids, we could just put up that on a wall and people could walk around and look at it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that has to necessarily be. There is some tab. You can start to look at some of these and say how much park and rec is.
Right.
And you get the flavor once you start to look at one next to
We
each
could
other.
actually take all the sticky notes and as a group, start organizing it.
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
Mind Mixer ever make any progress on that word cloud when they started off early, but they had of and the
Good idea.
and
Yeah.
downtown?
Yes.
Way out of proportion. Did they ever filter through it for something a little more simple?
No, we haven't, and actually Chris did that on in-house, and we could update that in-house as well.
If we could get rid of all the extraneous stuff that, whoa.
Your time's up.
So it's not a grammar lesson.
You're all forgiven.
Did you have something important to say, Mark?
For that matter,
You have the chair.
did we ever distribute the staff presentation or notes like from the Goddard presentation that you did?
Oh, the presentation
Yeah.
itself?
Well, there was a lot of information that was available to that meeting, and I never got a copy of it. And I
Okay.
still, I asked about it a couple
Yeah.
of meetings ago, and I don't know what you did at
Okay.
the, sorry, I didn't mean
So,
salary
no,
meeting.
the PowerPoint?
At Euclid.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know what you did at Goddard, because I was working through that one, or
Yeah.
the one here last week. Because
Goddard was more fun, actually. Goddard was fun because it was all this.
It'd be nice if you
all
could
the
get-
Safeways in town.
Well,
Yeah.
we could do a 2-hour barf of all that.
Or just send it to us. Yeah, we've seen it. Yeah, like 4 people saw your presentation and 5 may have seen the one at Goddard. So just get it to the rest of us. Let us go through it, at least get a
I'm
feel
a
for
little
it.
afraid to send out anything, attachments these days. Are your copies okay?
Well, make a copy and I'll come by and take it.
Send us a
So
link.
that it doesn't feel like barf of information. It's about organizing, again, it comes back to organizing all of that information that Dennis already has in certain categories and aligning it to what we got to Inspire Littleton. And so that you see that correlation. It's not just random information.
It's a digest of the Mind Mixer output, or input, whichever. It's a, here's what went on at the Euclid Forum, and at the Goddard Forum, and at the Community City Center Forum.
The parade.
The input we got from the face-to-face interactive stuff with the kids and adults making notes, and categorize it. So it isn't
Yeah.
just a stack of paper, but we've got the actual forum, meeting
that's-
presentations and
yeah.
reactions. We've got Mind Mixer.
Craig is doing all that. I'm not sure he's separated by where it came from necessarily.
I don't know that it
So,
matters
yeah.
where it comes from.
No, you just don't want to have 30 pages of stuff and your
Right.
eyes are glazing
It just
over.
has to somehow be categorized to something, either a principle or a challenge or something.
That might be asking a lot.
Or let us know how we can help. Maybe
Okay.
we can take some of that out.
But in the meantime, if we'd all think about doing what I suggest, is go out and look around the community and look for things that catch your eye, that surprise you, that aren't what you expected. And then in the meantime, as we start getting some of this information, we think about what we talked about tonight, get back to staff with a question like, can you bring in some information about this? I don't think we've heard much about. This economic development activity or the consequences of a zoning change or whatever.
Well, I think it's a great idea, Dave, just because I think you think about the house going in on Sycamore, which we weren't expecting, necessarily a single-family house to go in here. And you think, well, what are the implications of that? Are we going to see more is that just the first of that entire neighborhood redeveloping with single-family and some other things that we were anticipating? If it is that an opportunity for us to come in and redefine the streetscape? And should we be catching that early, and we don't have a mechanism for doing that in our review process? So each one of those things starts triggering lots of questions in terms of if this is something we're going to be seeing or something we want to see, what are the implications of it? So it's a great process, I think. And we're much better off than 10 years ago because now if we miss things, we can go on Street View and watch it in the meeting. So we can drive down those streets, which is nice. So.
Yeah, true.
Can I suggest the 27th of October or the 10th of November?
I was going to say the 10th, but also the 27th works.
Yeah, I guess the question is, can we pull it together by the 27th?
I like that date myself, and the 10th works for me as well. So
What was the other date? November what?
10th?
Those are both Saturdays?
Yeah.
And if we find that we have so much fun and make so much progress on the 27th, there's still the 10th available.
yeah.
I'm only half joking.
You are. It's a nervous laugh.
I mean, do we want to do the calendar thing, or can we agree on a date?
I can give you an answer tomorrow.
Okay. All right, I could easily just send out a poll then.
Yeah.
Do you get
Those
a
two
chance to look
dates.
at
Or just
stuff?
everybody email Dennis tomorrow.
All right.
So dates again, or, sorry? What dates?
27th or the 10th?
27th or the 10th?
Yep.
Oh. About that in-betweener.
Yeah,
The 3rd is fine, I'm gone.
Okay.
I know that.
Is it
That's not
just
fine.
us?
And I,
Just us chickens.
Just us? Or should
And
others,
well, I'm
given
going
that
to
this
look
is a comp
into,
plan much broader than just a regular planning retreat, should it be more open?
more open, you mean invite the public in as well?
Invite those who know what we're doing in. Staff.
We've done that on the previous ones. We've announced what it was we were going to talk about or tried to identify some core discussions and had. We actually did have Chris Gibbons show up one time, so.
Downstream folks.
Yeah. I think we never had more than two.
Yeah.
We talked about legal, so we had Suzanne in.
Yeah.
Before that, we had
Charlie, right?
we'd had
Brad.
Charlie in, and we had Brad in before that. So if you get identify generally what you're talking about and find two, at most three people with the expertise to come in and give us some basics or re-emphasize some basics that we all should know.
And Denise might be a natural just to participate with us, too.
Do that early on to kick it off, and
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so.
It's really, I think, going to be more of a brainstorming, and I don't know if we want to
You don't want to fill it up with too many,
come
No,
in and
it's-
start talking implementation.
we're not talking about a seminar on something. It's just, okay, I understand this is what you're going to be looking at today, some of the things you might, ask them. What are some of the things that they think we ought to be thinking about in terms of economic development or community infrastructure or whatever? Ask staff. There's no reason not to involve, and every reason to involve staff in the same kind of brainstorming. So get some highlights from them. Maybe that's where we'll get the one or two items we forgot.
What about the academic director at ACC? Maybe she or he, I don't know who it is, can talk about just trends of what they're seeing in academics.
Yes.
That's a good interface between the economic and the academic.
Something we don't know, so it'd be great to just,
I tell you what I'd really like to do, and I've been pushing this a lot, I know, but one of the things we heard in that seminar in Golden was you really need to develop some contacts with the business and development community. What are their
Merchant
needs? Where are they hurting? What has not been considered from their perspective? Get somebody from the development community, not just downtown, not just Hoodlum, to come in and say, here's some of the problems we've seen, here's some of the trends we think we're chasing. And yeah, they may be speaking strictly from their own personal perspective, but everybody has a different perspective. Nobody's taking a universal approach to this, so let's get some input from them.
Is there a chamber that represents this area?
South Metro.
That's a big area.
If we can get somebody like that, for the city's view on economic development and the academic from ACC and somebody from a developer or whatever, and come in and say, look, just give us a 5 or 10 minute, here's what's on our minds, here's what's been hurting or pinching or what we see coming at you. Maybe take a few questions, but 15-minute segments so they're not there all day.
So do we have, so we could use maybe the developer of Aspen to have them talk about why they chose Littleton, why they came to Littleton, and then is there a developer that did not come to Littleton and kind of have that perspective? Do we have any?
Yeah, actually, we do. The council has a think tank, which does have some developers from around the region, not necessarily, and very bright people, too. They're devoting a lot of time to this economic development process that the council's been asking for, but, perhaps we get them to give a little bit more time.
I read the article that you were quoted in about TODs.
Yeah, it was in today's paper.
It was in Sunday's paper, was it?
Yep, today.
Today's paper, that's right.
So
Yeah.
economic
The
development,
Cobell people that own the
developers,
property
TODs,
in Mineral.
it didn't happen.
commercial is
Commercial real estate, yeah.
Yeah.
Commercial and residential development,
Like Tom or RC or something.
is that a possibility?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Not just a generic developer, but commercial versus
Yeah.
residential? Because they're going to be slightly different focuses,
So does it make sense to leverage what council has as far as a think tank to maybe give us a presentation to start off the retreat?
Maybe that's not a bad idea, because they keep coming back to planning. We've been trying to get them on the track of what would be a good economic development policy for the city, what are some incentives if we wanted to go that route. They keep coming back to planning. So everybody likes to do planning, I guess. But maybe we get the group just to do a panel discussion, and we throw out a question and just let them have at it.
Eric Heil and Bill Detweiler both at that Golden Seminar talked a couple of times, or spoke a couple of times to the idea of not just involving the private and development community in the planning discussions, not necessarily the details, but also cross-feeding casually between council and staff and planning commission, not just informal actions and meetings. So, good opportunity.
Sorry, can I put in one more shot here?
Sure.
The light's not on, Mark.
Until the light turns on.
Once again, you're all safe. I sit here and listen to all the enthusiasm. It's great. I hear about the house on Sycamore, therefore we need to stay ahead of the curve and control and outline, and there's an opportunity. Throughout this whole evening, I keep thinking to myself, and I'll quote here, once in a while, let the market follow its own course. We're not going to control everything. Let the damn market take care of itself. It will. Keep that in mind as we try to, what's the word? Write the complete history and future of Littleton here. Well, it seems like we talk about it. You can shake your head no, but
No, we talk about it.
let the market follow its own course, as it will, regardless of what we say.
Somewhere between letting the market follow its own
Exactly.
course and recognize where it looks like it's going and what we're doing that's either going to interfere with it or help it, there's got to be a middle ground.
I've seen it laissez-faire, probably Frisco, or total planned economy, East Germany. Something in between.
I don't think anybody anywhere in town is going to go toward total planned economy, but bringing in developers to hear what they're thinking can help, as long as we take it with a grain of salt. Remember that when Ryder developed Riverfront, they thought that was the coming trend, and that lasted
There's
for
hit and
2
misses.
years.
There's hit and misses,
Right.
just like there's hit and misses
But it's
in the
input.
planning process.
It's input, like we've been doing for the last 3 months from the website and from the outreach meetings. So it's more input.
So it's about enabling and not precluding, but it's
Right.
also not about completely dictating. So I think what you're saying is we should not be dictating exactly what is going to happen, because the market who is actually going to dictate that for us, but it's ensuring that we enable it and not create any barriers.
Or recognizing it, and recognizing that if this is the direction it's going, there's no point in us trying to institute these kinds of regulations that are going to be work counter to where things are heading.
Get mine, enjoy the ride.
Well, we're 5 minutes over. Thank you for all of your time. I'll work with Dennis. And Dennis, could you just follow up with maybe May Doreen, have the selection, the vote for the 2 dates so that I'll probably forget to email you tomorrow, so maybe just send out an appointment and see who accepts what, and then we can talk about what preparation material that we have and a little bit better hold on the agenda and who we would want to invite to
Yeah,
participate.
that might affect those dates, too. We'll bring in a
Yeah,
bunch
that's a
of
good
guests.
one.
And Jenny, could I get your notes on the other
I think if we could leverage it off what council.
comp plans you looked at, the highlights or whatever?
Yeah, I think so,
Oh,
too.
you've got-
They're involved in the discussions of what the city's goals are, so.
Yeah, I could send it. I could send it.
Great.
Send it to
Super, I
Dennis.
can send it to everybody, yeah, that'd be great.
The Cliff Notes?
And Craig, I did do my notes from the,
you put those
from
together?
the Golden Seminar. And really, it's not bad. It's only a page and a half, so I'll send those to you. You can add, bleed on, and whatever,
Sure.
and get that out too.
Good, thanks.
Craig, before we go, second meeting in October, we talked about asking Jenny to see if she would give her presentation.
Oh, yes.
Recommend.
So next, that would be a week from, okay. And by the way, I can't make that meeting, unfortunately. So Dave, if you're going to be there, you're in charge.
What's the date on that again?
The next 2 weeks from tonight. So,
Brain's fried.
22nd?
22nd.
22nd.
Now, how much time do I have planned for that?
You had said half an hour.
Because I was
Yeah.
wanting to make double check,
Yeah, I
make sure I
think that's what we
had
were talking about, yeah, so. And Glenn knows better, I think, what's going to be on the agenda. So nothing on the agenda for next time?
Not at this moment.
Okay. So if.
Jenny, you got a 2-hour presentation.
Use it
My
wisely.
guess is that we'll
Or if
probably
not, we
have
could
some
actually cancel that
discussion
meeting.
following.
Yeah, we could cancel that meeting and actually have it at the next meeting, too, so if we don't have anything else on the agenda, so we.
By which time we'll
soon,
have
though.
3 other applications on the agenda.
Well, yeah, we'll know fairly soon.
My hunch is that it'll probably spur some discussion
Oh,
afterwards.
good.
This is my
Good.
hunch.
Okay, good.
So, I mean,
Okay, anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Excellent, thank you.
All in favor? Aye.
Right.
Aye.